Welcome to episode 121 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN, health.com/121.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
So, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. Thanks for joining me for another week. This show is an interview, and my guest this week is Elyse Resch. So, Elyse is a nutrition therapist in private practice in Beverly Hills with over 36 years of experience specializing in eating disorder, intuitive eating, and health at every size. She is the co-author of Intuitive Eating and the Intuitive Eating Workbook, is the author of the upcoming Intuitive Eating Workbook for teens, and has published journal articles, print articles, and blog posts. She also does regular speaking engagements, podcasts, and extensive media interviews. Her work has been profiled on many outlets like CNN, KABC, NBC, KTTV, AP Press, KFI Radio, USA Today, and the Huffington Post, amongst others. And Elyse is nationally known for her work in helping patients break free from diet mentality through the intuitive eating process. Her philosophy embraces the goal of developing body positivity and reconnecting with one's internal wisdom about eating. She supervises and trains health professionals, is a certified eating disorder registered dietitian, a fellow of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals, and a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So Elyse is someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for a long time. As I mentioned in the bio, she is the co-author of Intuitive Eating, a book and philosophy that's had a really big impact on me as a practitioner. And the new Intuitive Eating Workbook, which was released about a year ago, is something I regularly use with clients. I've previously had Evelyn Triboulet on the podcast before, who is the other author of Intuitive Eating. So I highly recommend also checking out that episode. It's number 68, and I'll link to it in the show notes. With this conversation with Elyse, we were pressed for time. She only had a limited gap between clients, and then to make things worse, I had some Skype issues with us connecting, which reduced our time even more. But despite the reduced length, I really did love what we did get to cover. So we talked about what intuitive eating is and what it isn't. So there's lots of misconceptions around it. So we went through this. We chatted about Elyse's background and how she got into being a nutrition therapist and how the intuitive eating book came to be. And then we chatted about her upcoming book, Intuitive Eating for Teenagers. So teenagers are such a susceptible group, and it's often at this time that they first get into dieting and they're becoming more conscious of their body. So we chatted about how the workbook can help with this and about Elyse's background and experience with working with teens. So it is shorter than usual, but I loved what Elyse had to share. So with the intro out of the way, let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Elyse Resch. Hey Elyse, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Cool. So look, I know we are a little pressed for time today, so I want to make the most of what we do have. And there's two main topics that I want to cover with you today. So the first is intuitive eating in general. So you literally wrote the book, Intuitive Eating, so you were the perfect person to chat about this. So I think it would be good to go through what intuitive eating is and what it isn't, because there are many misconceptions with it.
I'm so glad you're asking that question because it's the most important question, actually, because some people think that intuitive eating is just all about instinct. So you just listen to your body and that's it. But there's much more to that. In our brains, we have several different parts of our brain development. The primary, the most primitive part is the survival part of the brain, which we call the reptilian brain. And that's the part that holds the instinct. That's what keeps us alive. The dinosaurs, that was the only form of brain functioning that they had. And that's what kept them going until they were out for some other reasons, but not because they didn't eat enough. And then we also have the limbic brain, which was developed when mammals evolved. And that's a part of the brain that deals with emotions and social behaviors. So if you have a cat or a dog, you know that they can have feelings, but they can't really say to you, I'm mad at you because you left me for a week. So, but ultimately we became humans, and humans have the neocortex, the part of the brain that's able to have rational thought. So intuitive eating is a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and thought, because very often there are reasons why our basic instincts about eating get blocked by our emotions or by not feeling well. You're old and your appetite's gone, it doesn't mean you shouldn't eat. You still need to eat. So we need to use the rational part of our brain to monitor and help the other parts of the brain so that we will, eat with the wisdom of our bodies. So I think I'm so happy you asked that question because it's perfect. So thank you.
Yeah. And so I guess, I have some ideas. I work with clients and I use intuitive eating a lot. And I have my ideas of where people get it wrong. But I would love to kind of throw that to you first and see where do you think that people get or understand what intuitive eating means. And I know you've just given that concept, but yeah, what does that look like in real terms?
In one situation, I was at a conference where some professional gave a talk on intuitive eating and invited me to come, and then decided to bash intuitive eating by saying he looked up the word intuition and it said it was instinct, and you can't just eat by instinct alone. Well, he's right, except that doesn't bash intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is so much more than that. But that was a professional who was trying to promote some book he was writing, I think. I think the public wants to think it's all about the tongue. Just, be led by your tongue. So whatever your tongue wants, just eat it. Just eat, without any regard to how your body's going to feel, just eat. And I think it's wishful thinking. People would like to think, oh, good, if I just listen to my tongue, I'll be fine. But there's so many messages our bodies give us. The whole concept of interoceptive awareness, which is being in touch with, all the physical things that our bodies tell us, even the emotional things. And so we have to listen to more than that. So I think it's wishful thinking that leads people astray. Oh, good. Now, or the idea that they won't have to do any work. Oh, good. Intuitive eating just means I'll just eat whatever and I'll listen to whatever and not have to actually sit and think about it. Does that help?
It does. I mean, the just listening to the tongue and just listening to the palate is a big one, and it was one that I had listed down. I think the other one that there's two others. One is that you can't do any prepping in advance. So the idea of taking snacks with you or taking your lunch to work is an intuitive eating, because if you're doing that in advance, how can you possibly know what you're going to want to eat? So you have to wait until the moment at which hunger strikes before you can make any decisions around food. So I think that's a big one.
Yeah, and so that's a misconception, of course, because planning, self-care is part of intuitive eating. It's knowing that we're not just so powerful that in any moment we can snap our fingers and what we want will be around. So it's not about planning in a way that's a meal plan where you have to eat what you decide 3 days in advance. That's not the planning. The planning is for food availability, for making sure I always carry nuts and things in my purse because I never know when I might be hungry and there isn't food around. And in my office, I've got food all over the place. But that's wherever you heard that, that's incorrect.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's basically what you described is what I encourage with people. I'm like, take some snacks in, take your lunch in. If at that point you feel like I don't want to eat any of these things, by all means, go and get something else. But 9 times out of 10, you will be happy with whatever you've taken in advance.
Well, right. It's about having agency. Yeah. So just, the whole diet mentality or world of, absolute eating is about the external. It's telling you what you should do versus the internal voice, the inner wisdom that we're all born with that we tend to lose over time because of all the messages and myths that go around in our culture at either continent that we're on. And so yes, it's about being able to be present, and in that moment, really ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I hungry for that? As you're saying, you could order something else, or maybe you don't even feel like eating right now. Just because the clock turned 12 doesn't mean that it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
So I like to say, come from the inside out rather than the outside in. It's one of my
And I mean, I think the other big misconception from what I've noticed is I can only eat when I'm hungry and I have to stop when I'm full, and that kind of turning intuitive eating into a diet.
Right. That misses being human. You know, there are times when if somebody walks into my office with freshly baked cookies and I'm not hungry, I'm going to eat one of those cookies because it looks delicious and I want it. That's not against intuitive eating. There's got to be room for taste hunger too, besides just physical hunger.
Yeah. And then the opposite of that is there's times when people are under immense amount of stress, and that stress will suppress their hunger. And they can know that, you know what, normally me going 4 hours between a meal or 5 hours between a meal is about right. And when I'm finding that I'm going a lot longer than that and not feeling hungry, I probably should eat and just see what happens.
Well, and that's 100% correct, because it's taking into consideration, as I said, using the rational part of the brain, that emotions are affecting that hunger signal, that instinctual signal to eat. And so, okay, let's be smart, and realize I'm not hungry because I'm stressed, but I do need to eat. No, 100%. You're right on.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like people feel if they're doing intuitive eating that the brain has to completely take a back seat, that the brain's been this thing that has been leading them to diet, and now because they're not dieting, that they're not allowed to think about food in terms of what its health implications could be, or how you feel after that food in terms of its effect on your body. And it really just has to be about how something tastes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're mentioning nutrition or wanting to be healthy, that's why we left the chapter on nutrition to the very end.
Yeah.
Because you really can't think about those kinds of things when you're still, having some diet mentality. People tend to think in very black and white ways, Chris. And so I think that's why they're saying, okay, I was only using my head, now I'll only use my body. But we want to use all of it. We've got a lot of places we can get information.
Yeah.
Head to toe.
And so, look, we really jumped into the intuitive eating piece, and it might be good to just back up a little bit and for you to share a little bit about your story and maybe give listeners a bit of background on you and how you got into what you're doing, and then how you found your way into writing intuitive eating.
Well, that's great. If I go way back to high school, which is a lot of years ago, I had no idea that what one ate had anything to do with one's size. Somehow I missed the whole diet thinking. I wasn't in the popular social clubs. Maybe that was why, I'm not sure. But I just went merrily along the way, eating whatever I wanted in high school and didn't worry about it. And then I started my first semester at college at UCLA here in California. And the very first day of classes, I was living in a dorm, and I went down to the lunch line, and they had a place to pack lunches to take to school. And I'm standing in line, and it's time for me to pack my lunch. And I get this great big roll, Kaiser roll, and I put this big scoop of tuna on it. And the girl behind me goes, "Oh my God." And I went, what's the matter? Is there a fly in the tuna? And she said, "No, that's so fattening." And I was stunned by it. I had no idea what she was talking about. So I did have some emotional eating when I was young, but I didn't have any restrictive eating until years later, when I got involved with in a family that was very focused on nutrition. At this point, I would say that my former mother-in-law was orthorexic, in that everything, orthorexia being controlling life by healthy eating, so to speak. And I ended up becoming very restrictive from that standpoint, thinking it's bad if I eat a piece of pie, and it wasn't around a weight thing. But then I ended up losing weight as a result of that, and all of a sudden the two came together, and that's where I started some restrictive eating and dieting and binging. So that was my history. I had an eating disorder, which didn't really happen until my late 20s, early 30s, and I had been an elementary school teacher before I had my son, and I decided I wanted to go back to school and I didn't want to teach anymore. And so the family was so oriented to nutrition, the perfect thing was to become a nutritionist. The problem was I didn't like anything I learned in graduate school. In fact, in one of my classes, I knew that the paper that we were supposed to write didn't go along with my viewpoint on things. So I wrote two papers, one to please the teacher so I wouldn't fail the class, and one with what I thought the truth was. So I've always been a bit of a maverick. But it took me a number of years, and I got out of school. I did my training to become a registered dietitian nutritionist in a facility that was working with kids with developmental disabilities. And I decided that was going to be my career. That's what I wanted to do. It seemed very meaningful. I did not want to deal with weight control. It just didn't feel right to me with the knowledge, or it wasn't even knowledge, that was the practice that was happening at that time, which was basically we were taught in graduate school to give meal plans, tell people what to eat, give them exchanges based on the diabetic exchange plan, which is, how many servings of carbs, how many servings of protein, et cetera, et cetera. It just didn't feel right to me intuitively. And I tried to avoid it, but I couldn't help it. People got referred to me, doctors would refer patients to me, and many of them had medical problems that they'd say to help them lose weight. And it was a very bad time in my career because I didn't know what to do. It just felt like I can't do this. This isn't right. And yet people were coming to me for that. Luckily, around that time, there was some of the early literature was talking about non-diet approach many years ago. And I read that, and I'm very interested in psychology. I've been in therapy for many years, and I started to read it, and my first reaction was, oh, no, I can't tell people to eat whatever they want. I'm a dietitian. I'm a nutritionist. I know that certain foods are healthier than others. But then when I really started to understand the psychology of it and went even deeper into psychology, I knew what to do then. I knew that the idea would be to help people be autonomous in their eating, to not be telling them what to do. Yeah. And that's why when I got to that point, I realized diets don't work, not just because of the deprivation that people are feeling and experiencing when they're dieting, but also because of, or even more importantly, because their autonomy is being assaulted. They're basically being told what to do. And if you look at developmental stages in children as they grow up, the most important word that a little toddler is going to say is no, because that toddler is trying to assert, autonomy. And so it hit me that the best way to go with this was to really help people listen to their own bodies and make their own decisions about eating. And I've been in private practice 36 years, and this came on a few years after my practice started, and it's changed my life and changed so many people's lives. At that point, I started writing a book, and my co-author, Evelyn Tribole,
who I've actually had on the podcast before, so just so you know, I've had Evelyn on here.
Good. Okay. So Evelyn was sharing some office space with me. She lives an hour away, and she would come once a week to my suite of offices. And she had written a book prior to Intuitive Eating called Eating on the Run, and she had an agent. And so one day we ran into each other, and she looked a bit, dismayed. And I said, "What's the matter, Evelyn?" And she said, "Oh, I'm so frustrated. I'm trying to write a book with a psychologist, and she's a terrible writer." And I had my moment of inspiration and said, "I'll write it with you." And we came together. We both had similar ideas. We came together. She had an agent, which was very helpful. And that's where Intuitive Eating started. Now it first came out in 1995, which she probably mentioned, and we're in its third edition with a workbook and audiobooks, and now I'm about to be bringing out a teen book. So we'll talk about that when you're ready.
Yeah, sure. So just with Intuitive Eating, as you said, it's up to the third edition. If we went back to the first edition in 95 up to the third edition now. Like, how has things changed, and also how have you changed through that time?
Oh, dramatically. Thank you so much for that. Dramatically. The whole health at every size movement became, I don't know if that's been talked about here, but it's such a powerful movement to help rid weight stigmatization. And it just kind of opened up our eyes to the fact that we don't want intuitive eating to be just another way to lose weight. And in the very first book, we did talk about people lost weight through intuitive eating, find your natural weight through intuitive eating. So we took the whole focus off of weight because it's just morally wrong, and as far as I'm concerned anyway. And so by the third edition, that completely changed. There was no mention of, people losing weight. The only term we used was sometimes your weight normalizes, and normalize is such a neutral term. It doesn't necessarily mean weight loss. So that's a big difference. And then the science. I mean, Evelyn's the researcher in our, she's the one who loves research in our little team with this. And so there have been, I think she probably mentioned, as far as I know, over 80 studies that have validated intuitive eating as an evidence-based process for physical health and mental health, all the different wonderful things that happen when people are intuitive eaters in terms of more proactive coping skills, better self-esteem, better interoceptive awareness. There's so much positive, and there tends to be lower cholesterol. So there are lots of measures that have been taken that show that intuitive eating really is a beneficial way of going as compared to dieting.
And so let's move on to intuitive eating for teenagers, because that's kind of your new thing. I know when we were emailing, you said you've been writing a book on this. So I guess my first question is, like, why teenagers?
Well, I think it's most important in those years when once again, the developmental stage is about autonomy. We do that in toddlerhood and then again in teens, to really speak to a teenager about the importance of making his or her own choices in life. And intuitive eating is about that. So my goal is getting to the teens before they develop serious eating disorders. I work with a lot of teens. I work with a lot of young adults. And if only I could get to them at age 12. This book is geared from like 12 to 18, although I think that my adult clients are going to like it too, because it's kind of fun. But if I really, want to go back behind that, I think the most important is teaching people before they have children to be intuitive eaters, so that they can start this from the first time children have solid foods. And I have the great privilege of working with people who've had kids. They've worked with me to heal their own intuitive eating. They have kids. I was working with a woman yesterday who had come to me for years of bulimia, and she is a full-blown intuitive eater now, and she has 12-year-old twin daughters whom she has raised for the last 12 years as intuitive eaters, and they're just amazing. And I get these stories constantly. So it's so important to start as early as you can. And Evelyn and I were asked to write a teen book, and at that point, Evelyn decided not to, and so I took it on as my own project. And the publishers thought it was really important. They have a whole teen division of workbooks that they do. So I said yes. And it's a long project. I've been working on it since March of 2017. We're now in 2018. I just sent in the manuscript a few weeks ago, and I've just gotten connected with the copy editor. So we're in the copy editing stage for this entire summer, and it will come out in the spring of next year. So the Intuitive Eating Workbook, the adult one, took 22 months. This one's taking even more months. The publishing world's quite slow.
and so is the teen book more similar to the workbook as opposed to the original straight up book?
Yes, the original book was published by St. Martin's Press. The workbook was published by New Harbinger Press that specializes in workbooks. And so this is a book that it's a standalone book, which is what they wanted the other book to be as well, meaning someone wouldn't have had to have read Intuitive Eating to understand it. So it has a format where there's some psychoeducational teaching and then there's an activity or two that go with the point that's being taught, so that teens can learn about, for example, why diets don't work, or learn about how distractions keep them from, being present when they're eating. But then they have activities where they actually practice what they're being taught.
Okay.
So
cool. And just something you said before about parents and feeding kids with intuitive eating. I'm in the very lucky stage of I've got a 9-month-old baby, and so he's just starting to eat. Has been starting to eat for the last couple of months, and we are very much going with that way of eating. He does baby-led weaning and eats what we eat, and I feel very lucky that both myself and my partner have a very happy, healthy relationship with food. But it's wonderful to see a young child be able to eat and enjoy food. And considering I do this for a living with full-grown human beings, it's nice to do it with a tiny human.
Well, it's so great, and especially when you get them that young, if you orient them to a variety of all different kinds of tastes when they're, able to start chewing, and they love so many different foods. And then you don't make on that first birthday party when there's cake, you don't make a big deal out of, oh no, you can only have a little piece. You don't set up that whole good and bad food thing. You're going to see how you have a boy?
Yeah.
Or a girl? A boy. A little boy. Yeah. You're going to see how he grows up. I dedicated the new book. I have a son who's 47, and I dedicated the new book. Part of the dedication was to the teens in general, but to him, who was the original intuitive eater. I said, because he, I brought him up that way, which was great. Despite my own problems, I just kind of knew intuitively to not put restrictions on him.
Yeah, and it's nice because it then reinforces what you are doing with adults. So he'll go through phases where he just wants to eat lots of one food, and then he gets bored of that food, or he'll have days where he eats a ton of food and then days where he'll barely eat anything. And just knowing that that's completely normal and watching that is a really good reminder.
Yeah, as long as the two of you are so, sure of the sense that your child has the wisdom, the internal wisdom, and you don't freak out and don't get anxious about it, your child just moves along and does it his way, and he's going to be fine.
Yeah.
There's so much anxiety in bringing up kids of doing it the right way and making sure that they're healthy, and being afraid that if they haven't eaten very much and they start to try to push food in them, and there you begin eating problems, even at 9 months old, if you try to push food into a child that really doesn't want to eat.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah, he lets us know. He just drops it on the floor.
Seriously though, I mean, I've had so many parents come in who've had an issue from the beginning, because as soon as the child wasn't as hungry, they started pushing food, and now they've got a food fight going on. So.
Yeah. So with the teen book, is the idea that the parents will also read that, or is it just for teenagers? How are you conceptualizing it?
Well, that's another good question. Boy, you're full of good questions today. I was asked to also write an auxiliary piece, kind of a guidebook, a clinical guidebook for who would be reading the book. And it's going to be geared mainly toward the teens, but absolutely toward the parents too, and toward the clinicians, to be able to have that, whether it's psychotherapists or nutrition therapists, to be able to use it with them. Some teens will be able to get it and just go through it all on their own, and others will need some guidance. So yes, it's for a lot of people.
How will that work if the parents are the ones creating the food environment? So if, say, the parents are dieters, they're not necessarily on board, and then a teenager is reading this book and wants to do it. So how does that dynamic work?
Well, one of the activities I have in the book is learning how to speak up, how to not self-silence, how to be able to say, this is important to me, this is my body, this is the way I want to do it. Now, in terms of my counseling, I often have to have parents in. In fact, I have an 11-year-old client right now whose mother's been dieting for a very long time. And I've had a couple of meetings with the mother. I'm talking with the father this week to show them how important it is to change the way they're doing. If they can't change it for themselves, especially the mother, at least to be able to stop talking about, oh, I don't like my body. Oh, I'm not at my right weight, weighing herself, all those things. And she's very open. And so I'm hopeful that she'll make some changes, because the little girl already is talking about, I've got to lose weight by next year. Oh no, I shouldn't. She was in my office one afternoon, and I asked her if she was hungry, and she said, yeah, I'm really hungry. This was late afternoon. And I said, well, what did you have for lunch today? And, we went through her breakfast, which was a pretty balanced breakfast. And for lunch, all she had was a salad and some pickles. And I said, wow, of course you're hungry. And I said, how about a sandwich? And she said, oh no, I can't have carbs at lunch. I had them at breakfast. So it's 11 years old, and she already has that bad and good food idea that carbs are bad, that whole carb phobic thing that's going on. So so I have to be able to reach the parents as well, and sometimes I also have to reach the therapists of some of my clients, because there are some psychotherapists who have some ideas about certain diets that they think would be better for their clients, paleo or keto or all the kind of things that are really not scientifically healthy.
Okay.
Or psychologically healthy. Uh-huh.
And you work across the spectrum. I don't work with teens, not sort of for no other reason apart from they're just not showing up as part of my practice. But do you find that teens are able to get intuitive eating quicker than adults, or it really just depends on the individual?
Well, I'm a certified eating disorder RD. So if I'm working with someone who's got a really serious eating disorder, they're not very open. So I've got to help them with their therapist do the work to heal their eating disorders. But if I get someone like this 11-year-old, if that happened to be a teen, who's just really coming from a family where there's a big emphasis on being thin and an emphasis on dieting, they love it. They just get it right away, because I will say to them, so part of this work is to help your parents get out of your food. And they're so excited. I mean, they want any area that they can be autonomous and make their own decisions. So yes, I think if a teen has some disordered eating, not so much a serious eating disorder, but disordered eating, they will get it quicker, because so many adults have spent so many years dieting that they're so scared, so scared to let go of that, what feels like control for them, but it's really makes them out of control.
Yeah, the illusion of control.
Perfect. The illusion. We really don't have any control in this universe.
Yeah.
We just have the illusion of it.
And I think something you touched on there in terms of talking about eating disorders, that would be probably another area around intuitive eating where I think there can be some misunderstandings. And if I'm working with people on that spectrum, a lot of the time it's like you're not ready to be doing intuitive eating. You don't.
Well,
get
I'm going to
feedback.
disagree with you, Chris. I'm going to disagree with you, because it is one of the biggest issues around is that people say, "Oh no, you can't do intuitive eating if you're underweight, if you have no concept of hunger and fullness." There are 10 principles of intuitive eating.
Okay.
So yes, someone may not be able to detect proper fullness signals, for example. So if someone has anorexia, that person is going to be full all day long. So I can't say, eat when you're hungry. The person will, starve to death. However, if that person does feel a hunger signal, I will say that is accurate. So you want to respect that. So I can tune into that a little bit. But we can talk about diet mentality, about, giving license to eat all foods, about respecting the body, about emotional eating. There's so much that can be, just as you said earlier, intuitive eating is not just about one thing, about instinct. It's also not just about hunger and fullness. And so that's where I spend a lot of time talking to people about shifting their thinking about how it can be used in treatment. And it's being used in so many treatment programs around the country. Some of them have been started based on intuitive eating. So, in fact, I had a client who was on another part of the country, and we did phone sessions. And she had been hospitalized 11 times in 4 years for her anorexia. She would gain a bunch of weight in the hospital and come back and lose it all. And she had happened to have found intuitive eating, and it resonated with her because of the autonomy concept. And she begged me to work with her. And we had to make some adjustments because it was on the telephone then. There was none of this Skyping or anything. But But the one thing I did say to her is we can work on all those principles except the one about fullness, and you telling me I'm not going to eat because I'm full. So we signed a contract actually that said no, she still had to find a way to get enough food in so that she could progress and get healthy and gain some weight. So.
Okay. Cool.
So maybe I have disabused you of that belief.
You were right, and the thing is, I will normally be working on the other areas. So you are correct, but I guess it is that hunger and fullness, that feedback. I often find people are either at a 0 or a 10. There's no in between.
Well, right, and so there's so much thinking that actually is reductionist, that intuitive eating is only about hunger and fullness, and they can't start it then. So you ease into it in other ways, and then when they start getting healthier physically, they are able to start getting some accurate signals in terms of the hunger and fullness.
Okay. And so, look, I know we're running out of time. So my final question is, you are in your 70s, and I think you're the oldest person I've had
I'm 73.
You are the oldest person I've had on this podcast. You've lived through more diet fads than anyone I've spoken to, and probably been doing this longer than many of my guests have been alive, myself included. So I guess, what have you seen or lived through that you want to be able to kind of tell people about? Like, what extra wisdom do you have because of all those years?
Well, there's always been a lot of diets. I mean, always. They just change. Every year, every few months, there's a new diet that promises all of this. Your life is going to change dramatically if you do this diet. So I don't think that has changed over all these years. It's just what the diets are that change. I went through an era where it was no carbs, then it was no carbs and high protein, and then it was high carbs and low protein, and then it was no fat, and then it was lots of fat. And so, it's gone back and forth. And so to be very aware of not just drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say, just buying into the newest diet that's out there, and to really do some very deep soul work and spiritual work about the meaning, one's values and the meaning of your purpose in life, and not putting it all on what the size of the body is. That's a big piece of it. The other part, I think, this whole movement of health at every size that I mentioned, this has changed over the years, and it has changed the mentality of everybody I know in this, that I work with in this field. And I think it's so important for people to start looking at. It goes along with what I said spiritually, that we're much more than our bodies, and to be able to take care of ourselves. Self-care is such a big piece of it, without pinning it on, I'm going to do this to lose weight. It's about just feeling good. I mean, I've been moving my body my entire adult life, and it makes me feel good. I have strength. I have strong bones. I work all day and go out at night. I mean, I've got a lot going on, and it's because I've taken really good care of myself. So that's part of taking care of oneself for your mental and physical and spiritual health over what size you are, and being able to have compassion for people who don't have thin privilege, who walk around in our culture with the stigmatization of they're not good enough because of the size of their bodies. So that's the big change. That wasn't there in the early days.
Okay. So look, Elyse, you've been very generous with your time today, and it's been lovely chatting with you. Before I wrap this up, can you tell people where they can find out more about you? So website or social media, and I'll put everything in the show notes.
So the main place would be my website, which is ElyseResch.com. That's ELYSERESCH.com. I do have an Instagram account. I do have a Facebook account. I do have a Twitter account, but I have to say that I have very little time for social media. Part of it may be the age thing. I didn't, it hasn't been part of my life, but I will occasionally post something on Instagram and something on Twitter occasionally. But I think the best place would be my website, and my email is ElyseResch@gmail.com. It's very easy. Somebody who would like to write me a note. And there's also the Intuitive Eating website, which is intuitiveeating.org. It's not my personal one. It's the one that's general for intuitive eating. And that will give people access to all of or many of the studies that have been done on intuitive eating. Let me think if there's any other way. I do have a phone number, but I think best to email me.
Yeah, that's fine. And as I said, I will put all of that in the show notes. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to be able to go through some of the misconceptions around intuitive eating and talk about the book aimed at teens. And I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Oh, I'm so excited about it. And I really do think it'll speak to so many people beyond teens. So thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks, Elyse.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.